On a single island, smaller than the Netherlands, sit the factories that build the modern world. More than 90% of the most advanced computer chips on the planet are made in one place. The processor in the phone in your pocket, the brain inside the car you drive. The silicon that trains every artificial intelligence now reshaping the global economy. Almost all of it begins here, on the western edge of a mountainous island in the Pacific. Without this one place, the production lines of the entire digital age would slow to a halt within months. And yet, by most of the world's governments, this island is not officially a country at all. Only about 12 nations formally recognize it. To the United Nations, it does not exist as a member state. It has its own elected president, its own army, its own currency, its own passport, accepted in more than 170 countries. But at the Olympic Games, its athletes are not allowed to compete under their own name, or raise their own flag, or play their own anthem when they win. They march instead under a title invented to avoid offending a larger neighbor. They are called simply Chinese Taipei. So here are two facts, both completely true, sitting side by side. This is one of the most indispensable places on Earth, and it is one of the most diplomatically invisible. The world cannot function without it, and the world cannot quite agree that it is there. The argument over this island fills newspapers and war game simulations and the speeches of presidents. But the argument is almost always about what the island means to someone else, to the powers that want it, or fear losing it, or depend on it. Far less often does anyone stop to ask what the island actually is, who lives here, what they remember, what they built and survived and became, long before the rest of the world started paying attention. This is Taiwan, and the story almost no one tells is the one that belongs to the island itself. For most of the outside world, the name arrives wrapped in confusion before it arrives as a place. Taiwan, the Republic of China, Formosa, Chinese Taipei. 4 names for the same island, each carrying a different argument inside it. Portuguese sailors passing in the 1500s called it Ilha Formosa, the beautiful island, and the name stuck in the West for 4 centuries. The government here still officially calls itself the Republic of China, a name inherited from a mainland it has not governed in over 70 years. The result is a place that most people feel they already understand because they have heard it argued about so many times. A flashpoint, a breakaway province, a smaller, contested version of somewhere else. The headlines arrive so constantly that the island disappears behind them. Few people who could name the dispute could name a single mountain here, or a single river, or the people who were here first. Because the deepest fact about Taiwan is not about chips, or recognition, or the strait that separates it from the mainland. It is this: the ancestors of nearly every island culture across 2 oceans, from the Philippines to Hawaii, from Borneo to Madagascar off the coast of Africa, can trace their origins back to here. Around 5,000 years ago, a seafaring people set out from this island in wooden boats. Linguists who study the deep architecture of language have found that the Austronesian family, spoken today by close to 400 million people across half the globe, has its oldest and deepest roots here on Taiwan. Of the primary branches of that entire vast language family, nearly all of them exist only on this one island. The languages of the Maori of New Zealand, the Hawaiians, the Malays, the Malagasy people of Madagascar 4,000 miles away, all of them are distant cousins of tongues still spoken in the mountains of Taiwan. It is one of the great migrations in human history, and it started here. People left this island and kept going, generation after generation, until they had settled a span of the planet wider than any other culture before the modern age. The island the world now argues over is, in a real and traceable sense, a mother of nations.
Those first peoples never left entirely.
Today, the indigenous nations of Taiwan, 16 officially recognized groups, make up a small share of the population, a little over 500,000 people. But they are the oldest thread in the island's story, here for thousands of years before anyone else arrived. On Orchid Island, a small volcanic outcrop off the southeastern coast, the Tao people still live by the rhythm of the flying fish. Each spring, when the fish arrive on the warm Kuroshio current, the men launch hand-built wooden boats, painted with spirals and concentric eyes, and follow rituals passed down across countless generations. The boats are not decorations for tourists. They are the working technology of a maritime culture that reads the ocean the way others read a map. And on that same island sits something the Tao never asked for. In the 1980s, the government built a storage site there for low-level nuclear waste, barged out to one of the most remote communities in the country. For decades, the Tao have protested it, a small Austronesian people on a small island, carrying the byproduct of the modern economy that the rest of Taiwan helped to power. The contradiction the whole island lives inside, the indispensable and the overlooked, repeats itself here in miniature. In the center of the island, beside the still water of Sun Moon Lake, the Tao people keep one of the smallest indigenous cultures alive, numbering only in the hundreds. Their oral history tells of ancestors who chased a white deer across the mountains until it led them to the lake, and they stayed. The deer is gone now from the story's literal landscape. The people are still here. There are 16 recognized indigenous nations in all, and they are not one people, but many. The Amis, the largest, number over 200,000 and hold elaborate harvest festivals along the eastern coast. The Atayal and the Truku once marked the faces of those who came of age with intricate tattoos, lines inked across the brow and chin that recorded a person's skill and standing, a practice the colonizers later banned. In the south, the Paiwan and the Rukai built villages of stacked slate, dark stone houses roofed in the same grey rock, and carved the 100-pace viper, a snake they revered as an ancestor, into their lintels and their wedding robes. Much of this was nearly erased. Of the roughly 24 indigenous languages once spoken here, several are already gone, their last fluent speakers dead, and others survive in only a handful of elderly voices. Generations of children were punished for speaking their mother tongues in school, first under the Japanese, then under the government that followed. Only in recent decades has the island begun, seriously, to try to keep these languages alive, recognizing at last that they are not relics, but the oldest living thing Taiwan has. To understand why these cultures survived so long in isolation, you have to understand the land itself, because Taiwan is not a gentle island. It is one of the most vertical, most geologically violent landscapes on the planet, and that violence is the reason so much of it stayed wild. Taiwan sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, at the seam where two great plates of the Earth's crust collide. The Philippine Sea Plate grinds northwest into the edge of the Eurasian Plate, and where they meet, the land has nowhere to go but up. The collision is still happening. The mountains here are not ancient and worn down. They are young, sharp, and rising still, pushed higher every year, even as the rain and rivers tear them back down. The result is staggering for an island this size. Taiwan has 268 peaks that rise above 3,000 meters. Its highest mountain, Yushan, called Jade Mountain, reaches 3,952 meters into the sky, the tallest peak in all of Northeast Asia. From a tropical coastline, you can drive in a single day up into a landscape of conifer forest and alpine snow. Almost two-thirds of the island is mountain, so steep and so densely forested that for most of human history, the interior could not be crossed. Nowhere is the raw geology more visible than at Taroko Gorge on the eastern coast. Here, a river has spent millions of years cutting straight down through a mountain of solid marble, carving a canyon whose walls rise hundreds of meters of polished gray and white stone, so narrow in places that the sky becomes a thin ribbon overhead. The marble was once seabed, limestone laid down beneath an ancient ocean, then buried, heated, crushed, and finally lifted thousands of meters into the air by the same collision, still shaping the island. To stand at the bottom of Taroko is to stand inside a slow-motion explosion. That same collision exacts a price. The plates do not move smoothly. They lock and strain and then slip all at once. In 1999, a massive earthquake struck the center of the island in the dark before dawn, killing more than 2,000 people and collapsing buildings across the country. The ground here is never entirely still. Taiwan is shaken by thousands of small tremors every year, and every few decades by a large one. The island that builds the world's most delicate machines is itself built on a fault line that can move without warning. The Earth is not the only force that tests the island. Taiwan lies squarely in the path of the Western Pacific's typhoons, and some of the most powerful storms on the planet make landfall here. In 2009, Typhoon Morakot stalled over the south and dropped close to 3 meters of rain in a matter of days, more than some places see in a year. A massive landslide buried the village of Xiaolin, killing hundreds in a single night. The same steep, young mountains that make the island beautiful also make it deadly when the rain comes, the slopes giving way under the sheer weight of the water. But the volcanic heat beneath the island offers a gentler gift as well. In the hills on the edge of Taipei, at Beitou, sulfurous steam rises from the ground and hot mineral springs bubble up from the volcanic rock below. The Japanese, who loved their bathing culture, built elegant hot spring resorts here a century ago, and people still come to soak in the steaming, faintly sulfur-scented water, warmed by the same restless geology that shakes the island and built its peaks. And yet the same forces that make the land dangerous also make it extraordinarily alive. Cut off by mountains, ringed by ocean, sitting at the meeting point of tropical and temperate worlds, Taiwan became a refuge for life found nowhere else. High in the western mountains lies Alishan, a realm of ancient forest where giant cypress trees, some of them thousands of years old, rise straight and vast out of the perpetual mist. A narrow-gauge railway, built by the Japanese to carry timber down the mountain, still climbs in tight switchbacks through the cloud forest. Before dawn, travelers gather on the high ridges to watch a phenomenon the island is famous for. As the sun rises, it does not reveal a valley below, but an ocean of cloud, a vast white sea filling the lowlands, with only the highest peaks breaking through like islands. The Sea of Clouds, the Taiwanese call it, and people have come to watch it break over these mountains for generations. Climb into the high, broadleaf forests of the Central Range, and you enter the territory of the island's most beloved animal, the Formosan black bear. It is the only bear native to Taiwan, a glossy black moon bear with a pale crescent splashed across its chest, and it exists nowhere else on Earth. When the people of Taiwan were asked to vote for the animal that best represented their island, this is the one they chose. But the bear is vanishing into the very forests that hide it. Only an estimated 200 to 600 remain in the wild, scattered across the highest and least disturbed mountains. They are so rarely seen that researchers track them by footprints, by claw marks on trees, by the scat they leave on remote ridgelines. In one early survey of 15 bears captured and collared, more than half were missing a toe or part of a paw, caught at some point in illegal snares set in the forest. The island's chosen symbol survives at the edge of disappearing, in the few places human development has not yet reached. Lower down, where the forest opens, the island's only native primate moves through the canopy. The Formosan macaque lives in troops along forest edges and mountain trails, intelligent and adaptable, found on this island and no other. And in the broadleaf woods flashes a bird so striking that it too was once voted to stand for the spirit of the Taiwanese people. The Taiwan blue magpie, deep blue and crimson, with a tail trailing nearly half a meter behind it, lives in cooperative family groups, loud and clever and fiercely loyal, mobbing predators many times its size to protect the flock. Higher still, in the conifer belt near the peaks, live two of the rarest pheasants in the world. The Mikado pheasant, almost black with fine white barring, so elusive it is sometimes called the bird of the mist, and Swinhoe's pheasant with its electric blue and white. Both exist only on Taiwan. Both move like rumors through the high forest, seen by few, photographed by fewer. In the undergrowth lives one of the island's quietest success stories. The pangolin, a shy, scaled creature that rolls into an armored ball when threatened, is the most trafficked mammal on Earth, hunted nearly to oblivion across Asia and Africa for its scales and its meat. Yet on Taiwan, after decades of protection, the Formosan pangolin has quietly recovered, until this island now holds one of the densest, healthiest pangolin populations anywhere in the world. A creature being wiped out almost everywhere else has found here a place to endure. And not every loss on this island is permanent. The Formosan sika deer, a graceful spotted deer, was hunted out of the wild entirely by the late 1960s, surviving only in zoos and private herds. Then, beginning in the 1980s, conservationists carried their descendants back to the southern tip of the island and released them, and today, wild sika deer once again move through the grasslands of the south, returned from a kind of extinction. But perhaps the strangest wonder of all moves not on four legs, but on millions of fragile wings. Taiwan is sometimes called the Kingdom of Butterflies, home to more than 400 species, around 50 of which live nowhere else. And each winter, in the sheltered valleys near Maolin in the south, the island hosts one of the rarest natural events on the planet. As the cold arrives in the north, hundreds of thousands of purple crow butterflies, sometimes more than 1 million, begin to move. They drift south down the spine of the island, following ancient routes through mountain passes, until they gather in a handful of warm, narrow valleys to wait out the winter. When the sun catches them, their dark wings flare with sudden violet and blue, and the whole forest seems to flicker. There are only 2 places on Earth where butterflies mass like this to overwinter. The other is the monarch valleys of Mexico. This is the other one, and almost no one outside Taiwan has ever heard of it. One man spent his life making sure it survived. Chan Chia-long first saw the purple butterfly valleys as a college student in the early 1990s and was humbled by the sight of thousands of them rising at once. When he returned years later and found one of his favorite viewing spots paved over into a parking lot, he understood that even the most common creature could be lost. He has spent more than 2 decades since tracking the butterflies, marking their wings, mapping their secret highways across the island, and teaching the indigenous Rukai communities of the valleys to protect them. Along the migration route, Taiwan does something done nowhere else on Earth. It puts up road signs, warning drivers of butterflies ahead. And at the height of the season, the Highway Authority closes lanes of a national freeway so the swarm can cross in safety. This is the island beneath the argument. Older than any nation that has claimed it, stranger and richer than any headline can hold. But the human history of Taiwan is layered as deep as its marble, and to understand why the world argues over it now, you have to go back to the first outsiders who tried to take it. On the southwestern coast, in the city of Tainan, that history is written into the stone. Tainan is the oldest city in Taiwan, and for a long time, it was the only door through which the wider world entered the island. The deep layers of everyone who ruled here are still standing, one built on top of the last. In 1624, the Dutch East India Company, the most powerful corporation in the world at the time, sailed in and built a fortress on a sandbar here, a trading post they called Fort Zeelandia. They were not interested in the island for itself. They wanted a base for the trade in silk and silver and deerskin between China and Japan. And they brought in Han Chinese laborers from across the strait to farm sugar and rice. For the first time, large numbers of mainland Chinese settlers crossed the water to Taiwan, drawn by Dutch money. In the far north, Spanish forces built their own outpost until the Dutch drove them out. For a few decades, this beautiful island was a corner of the European age of empire, run by a company for profit. Then came a man whose name is still claimed, today by 3 different governments. In 1662, a warlord and Ming dynasty loyalist known to history as Koxinga, fleeing the new Qing rulers who had conquered the Chinese mainland, laid siege to Fort Zeelandia. For 9 months, his forces surrounded the Dutch garrison, until the company surrendered and sailed away. Koxinga had taken Taiwan and made it, for the first time, a base of Chinese power, a last redoubt for a fallen dynasty. Tainan never lost the imprint of being first. It holds the oldest Confucius temple on the island, founded in the days of Koxinga's kingdom, and the oldest streets, and a density of shrines and old houses found nowhere else. For Taiwanese, it remains the cultural heart, the place the island's recorded history begins, the city where every later layer was laid down on top of the first. He died only months later, but the layers kept stacking. In 1683, the Qing dynasty defeated Koxinga's heirs and annexed the island to their empire, though for 2 centuries they governed it loosely, an unruly frontier on the edge of China. Han Chinese migration accelerated. The indigenous peoples were pushed steadily off the western plains and into the mountains. The Taiwan we recognize, with its Hoklo and Hakka majority, speaking dialects carried from the coast of Fujian, took shape across these generations of crossing. And then, in 1895, the island changed hands again, not by its own choice. China lost a war with Japan, and in the treaty that followed, it handed Taiwan to the Japanese Empire. For 50 years, Taiwan was a Japanese colony. The Japanese built railways the length of the island, laid down ports and schools and sugar refineries, and turned Taiwan into a productive piece of their empire. They also enforced their language, suppressed local identity, and demanded the islanders become subjects of the emperor. Few places carry the fingerprints of so many rulers: Dutch, Spanish, a Ming loyalist, the Qing, the Japanese, each leaving roads, words, temples, bloodlines, and grievances behind. The Japanese century was not gentle, least of all in the mountains. In 1930, in the high settlement of Wuxie, the Sedic people rose against their colonizers. Led by a chief named Mona Rudao, warriors attacked a Japanese gathering and killed more than 100 people. The response was overwhelming and merciless. The Japanese sent in troops, aircraft, and even poison gas against the mountain villages, and by the time the uprising was crushed, much of the Sedic community was dead, some by their own hand rather than surrender. It was one of the last great acts of armed indigenous resistance on the island, and for decades it too was a story told only in whispers. You can still walk through one of those layers in the hills of the northeast, in the old gold mining town of Jiufen. The Japanese mined gold from these mountains, and the town that grew up around the work climbed the steep slope in tiers of narrow stone lanes and red lanterns. When the gold ran out, Jiufen emptied and nearly died. Then it was rediscovered, its misty, lantern-lit alleys becoming one of the most atmospheric places in the country, a small fragment of the Japanese century preserved in stone steps and tea houses clinging to the hillside. "50 years of Japanese rule ended in 1945, when Japan lost the Second World War. Taiwan was handed to the Republic of China, the government then ruling the mainland under the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang. After half a century apart, the islanders expected to be welcomed home. Instead, the arrival of the new mainland administration brought corruption, inflation, and contempt, and within 18 months, the island's relief curdled into rage. What happened next is the wound at the center of modern Taiwan. It begins, of all places, with a cigarette. On the evening of the 27th of February, 1947, agents enforcing the government's tobacco monopoly confront a widow selling untaxed cigarettes on a Taipei street. They strike her on the head with a pistol. A crowd gathers. The agents fire into it, and a bystander falls dead. By morning, the city is in revolt, and the anger spreads across the whole island. For a few days, ordinary Taiwanese take control of their own towns and draw up lists of demands, asking for local representation, free speech, an end to the corruption. The governor stalls and negotiates and waits. And then the troops arrive from the mainland. Beginning in early March, soldiers move through the cities and kill without restraint. They target the educated and the prominent first: the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the journalists. An entire generation of Taiwanese leadership rounded up and shot, some dumped in harbors, some never found. Estimates of the dead in those weeks range from 18,000 to 28,000 people. The killing of those weeks has a name now: the February 28th incident. But it was only the beginning. 2 years later, in 1949, the nationalists lost the Chinese Civil War entirely. The communist forces took the mainland, and the defeated government of Chiang Kai-shek fled across the strait to Taiwan, bringing nearly 2 million soldiers and refugees, and a determination never to lose control again. They declared martial law, and they did not lift it for 38 years. It became one of the longest periods of martial law in the history of the world. The era is remembered now as the White Terror. For decades, anyone suspected of disloyalty, of communist sympathy, of merely speaking out, could be arrested, imprisoned, or killed. More than 140,000 people were imprisoned for political reasons. More than 1,000 were executed. To speak of the February killings at all was forbidden. Families of the dead were left not even knowing why their relatives had vanished. An entire society learned to be silent, and stayed silent for nearly 2 generations. That silence is the thing most outsiders never learn about Taiwan. The democracy the island is praised for today is not old, and it was not given. It was taken back, slowly, painfully, by the people who had lived through the terror. And the man who finally broke the silence had lived inside it. Li Tenghui was Taiwanese-born, in a time when the highest power belonged almost entirely to mainlanders. As a young man, he had been detained and interrogated for his suspected leftist past, told that killing him would be as easy as crushing an ant. He survived, rose through the system, and became, against every expectation, the island's president. In 1995, standing as the head of the very party that had run the terror, he did something no leader before him had dared. He apologized to the people, in public, for the February killings, and named the wound aloud at last. Then he went further. In 1996, Taiwan holds its first fully free, direct presidential election. For the first time in the island's entire history, under any ruler, the people choose their own leader at the ballot box. The man who had been told he could be crushed like an ant stands for election, and the island that had spent 38 years under martial law votes. The transformation from one of the world's longest dictatorships into one of Asia's most vibrant democracies happened within a single lifetime, and largely without bloodshed. Today, that democracy is woven into the texture of the island. In 2019, Taiwan became the first place in all of Asia to make same-sex marriage legal. Its elections are loud, fierce, deeply contested, and genuinely free. In the heart of Taipei, the grand memorial hall built to honor Chiang Kai-shek still stands, and around it, the country openly argues about whether to keep it, what it means, and how to remember a founder who was also a dictator. That argument, held in the open, is itself the proof of how far the island has come. The young carry that democracy fiercely. In 2014, when the government tried to push through a sweeping trade pact that would have bound the island more tightly to the mainland economy, hundreds of students climbed into the national legislature and occupied it for weeks in what became known as the Sunflower Movement. They forced the pact to be shelved. It was a generation declaring, in the most direct way possible, that the island's future would be decided by the island's own people, in the open, and not negotiated away quietly. 2 years later, Taiwan elected Tsai Ing-wen, the first woman ever to lead the country, and re-elected her by a landslide. The presidency now passes, peacefully and by vote, from one leader to the next, the current president, Lai Ching-te, continuing a line that would have been unthinkable within living memory. And the capital that holds that memory is one of the most quietly remarkable cities in Asia. Taipei is a place of contradictions worn lightly. The skyscraper Taipei 101, once the tallest building in the world, rises above lanes where incense still curls out of century-old temples. At Lungshan Temple, worshippers fold their hands before a crowd of gods drawn from Buddhism, Taoism, and folk religion all at once, an easy syncretism that refuses to choose. And after dark, the city belongs to its night markets, where the air fills with the smell of grilled squid and stinky tofu and pepper buns pulled hot from clay ovens, and the whole population seems to be out, eating, late into the night. Taipei also guards a treasure that deepens the whole strange argument over the island. When the nationalists fled the mainland in 1949, they did not come empty-handed. They carried with them the imperial art collection of China's emperors, the finest jades, bronzes, paintings, and porcelain gathered across 1,000 years, crated up and shipped across the strait ahead of the advancing communists. Today, that collection fills the National Palace Museum in Taipei, the single greatest hoard of Chinese imperial art anywhere in the world. The masterpieces of Chinese civilization sit not in Beijing, but here, on the island that the mainland says is not a country. Religion here is just as alive and just as woven into daily life. The island's temples are not museums, but working centers of community, thick with incense and the clatter of fortune blocks thrown to ask the gods a question. Once a year, the sea goddess Mazu, protector of fishermen and sailors, is carried out of her temple in the town of Dajia and paraded across the island in a procession that lasts 9 days and covers more than 300 kilometers on foot. Millions take part, walking through the night, crawling beneath the goddess's palanquin for a blessing, lining the roads to offer food and water to strangers. It is one of the largest religious pilgrimages on the planet, and almost no one outside the Chinese-speaking world has heard of it. Food here is its own form of identity. The bubble tea, now sold in cities on every continent, was invented in the city of Taichung. Tapioca pearls dropped into iced tea, a small Taiwanese idea that quietly conquered the world. The island that the world cannot officially recognize has, without anyone quite noticing, exported its breakfast, its tea, and the chips inside its phones to nearly everyone arguing about it. There is a particular texture to ordinary life here that surprises people who only know the island from the news. Taiwan is, by most measures, one of the safest and most easygoing societies in Asia, a place where strangers return lost wallets and where the streets stay lively and unthreatening late into the night. Its national comfort food is a steaming bowl of beef noodle soup, simmered for hours, argued over endlessly, with its own yearly festival to crown the best in the city. Convenience stores stand on nearly every corner, open at every hour, where people pay their bills, collect their parcels, and pause for a hot meal. For all the weight of history and the long shadow of the strait, daily life on the island is remarkably gentle. And that gentleness is, in its own quiet way, the whole point of what was won. Which brings us back to the silicon. Because if the deepest fact about Taiwan is its ancient past, the most consequential fact about Taiwan today sits in an unremarkable cluster of low buildings on the northwest coast, in the city of Hsinchu. This is the home of Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, the most important company most people have never thought about. It was founded in 1987 by an engineer named Morris Chang, who had spent decades in the American chip industry before returning to Taiwan to try something no one had done. Instead of designing its own chips, his company would build nothing but other companies' designs, becoming a pure manufacturer, a foundry that anyone could hire. It was a strange idea at the time. It became the foundation of the entire digital economy. Today, this single company makes roughly 70% of all the chips manufactured under contract in the world, and well over 90% of the most advanced ones, the tiny, almost unimaginably precise processors at the cutting edge. The most powerful smartphone, the most advanced fighter jet, the servers, training every major artificial intelligence, almost all of them depend on chips etched here, on circuits so small they are measured in billionths of a meter. To make them requires machines of such complexity and skill of such depth that no other place on Earth has been able to match it, despite years of effort and tens of billions of dollars spent trying.
To grasp how exacting this work is,
Consider what a single one of these factories needs simply to run. The machines etch their patterns onto silicon using light, building structures only a few atoms thick, in rooms kept cleaner than a hospital operating theater, where a single speck of dust can ruin a chip. The process is so thirsty that the factories consume staggering quantities of ultra-pure water, scrubbed of every impurity. When a severe drought struck the island a few years ago, the government diverted water away from rice farmers to keep the chip factories running, because the world could absorb a smaller harvest far more easily than it could absorb a pause in the supply of chips. The rest of the world has noticed its dependence, and it frightens them. The United States, Japan, and Germany have all offered enormous subsidies to lure Taiwanese chip factories onto their own soil, hoping to copy a piece of what this island does, to hold some of that capacity somewhere they consider safer. Taiwan has begun to build a few of those plants overseas, but the heart of the operation, the most advanced work, the deepest knowledge, remains here, on the island where it has always been. And so, the island finds itself holding something more powerful than an army. Analysts have a name for it. They call it the Silicon Shield. The theory is simple and unsettling. Taiwan is so essential to the global economy, so impossible to replace, that the rest of the world has a powerful reason to keep it safe, and a powerful reason to fear any disruption to it. The same factories that make Taiwan indispensable may also be the thing that protects it. The island's survival and the world's supply of computing power have become, strangely, the same question. But a shield is not the same as peace. To understand what is truly at stake here, you have to go to the very edge of the country, to the place where Taiwan comes closest to the mainland that claims it. You have to go to Kinmen. Kinmen is a small group of islands controlled by Taiwan, but it does not sit off the Taiwanese coast. It sits off the coast of mainland China, so close that from its beaches you can see the skyscrapers of the Chinese city of Xiamen rising across the water a few kilometers away. It is the strangest border in the world. On one shore, the towers of one of the largest economies on the planet. On the other, this quiet, low island of fields and old stone villages flying a different flag, belonging to the government the mainland says does not legitimately exist. For decades, this was the front line of a war that never quite ended, and at moments, it became one of the most dangerous places on Earth. On the 23rd of August, 1958, the artillery on the mainland opens fire on Kinmen. In a single afternoon, tens of thousands of shells fall on the tiny island. The bombardment does not stop in a day. It goes on in waves for 44 days and then settles into a strange rhythm that lasts for 20 years. Shells fired on alternating days, the island living its entire life under a sky that might at any moment fill with iron. Nearly 500,000 shells fall on Kinmen across that period. The people dig deep tunnels and shelters into the granite and learn to live underground. And then, slowly, the war cooled, without ever truly ending. Today, Kinmen is at peace, and the contrast is almost too much to hold. The same beaches that were once braced with rows of anti-landing spikes and sown with mines are now quiet. Tourists walk where soldiers once watched the horizon. In one of the strangest second acts in industrial history, the island took the millions of shell casings left over from the bombardment and turned them into something else. Kinmen is now famous for its kitchen knives, forged by local blacksmiths from the steel of the very shells that were once meant to destroy it. You can buy a cleaver made from a Cold War artillery shell, hammered into a tool for cutting vegetables. The strangest weapon Kinmen ever fired, though, was not a shell, but a song. In 1967, the island raised a wall of 48 loudspeakers facing the mainland. 3 stories of concrete and sound aimed across the water at the Chinese city of Xiamen. From it, the military broadcast invitations to defect, news of the prosperous life across the strait, and above all, music. The gentle ballads of Teresa Teng, the most beloved singer in the Chinese-speaking world, her voice carrying for kilometers over the sea. It was said that mainland soldiers would listen in secret, that some whispered they loved the little Teng more than they loved their leaders. At least one mainland pilot later said it was her voice drifting across the water that helped draw him to defect. The wall still stands on its sea cliff, decommissioned now, and a few times a day it sputters to life for visitors, and Teresa Teng's voice floats softly across the strait once more, toward a coast that can almost be touched. It was here too, in 1949, that the war for the whole island nearly ended before it began. Thousands of mainland troops landed on Kinmen's beaches in a single night, in the battle remembered as Gunning II, and were thrown back into the sea. Had they broken through, the entire history that followed might never have happened at all. Stand on a Kinmen beach at dusk, looking across the narrow water at the lights of the mainland coming on, and you can feel the whole argument compressed into a single view. 2 governments, both claiming to be China, one ruling a fifth of humanity, the other ruling this island of 23 million people and refusing to disappear. The water between them looks calm. It has looked calm for a long time. No one knows for how much longer. This is the heart of what the world argues over, and it is more delicate and more human than the headlines allow. Beijing regards Taiwan as a province that must one day return, by agreement if possible, and has never renounced the option of force. Taiwan's own people are not waiting to be told who they are. Poll after poll shows that fewer and fewer of them think of themselves as Chinese at all. A generation has grown up here that has only ever known Taiwan as a free and self-governing democracy that remembers the White Terror as history rather than fear, and that simply wishes to keep living the way it lives. The danger in that is real, and it should not be dressed up or waved away. The people of Kinmen and of the whole island carry a memory of what it cost the last time the question of who rules Taiwan was answered by force. The shells of Kinmen, the names on the February memorials, the missing toes of the mountain bears caught in snares, are all reminders that this island has paid heavily, again and again, for being a place that others wanted to control. And yet, to leave the story there, on the edge of the strait, on the question of war, would be to make the same mistake the headlines make. It would be to let the argument become the island. Taiwan is not, and has never been, only a flashpoint. It is the cradle of the Austronesian world, the starting point of a migration that settled half the planet. It is a wall of young marble mountains rising out of a tropical sea, shaken by the same plates that shaped them. It is the last refuge of the moon bear and the blue magpie and the mist-colored pheasant, and the winter home of 1 million purple butterflies that cross a closed freeway to reach their valley. It is a society that walked within one lifetime out of one of the longest dictatorships in the world and into a democracy fierce enough to argue with its own founders in public. It is the place that quietly built the machinery the rest of the world now runs on, and asks in return, mostly, to be left in peace. Few places on Earth are spoken about so often and understood so little. The argument over Taiwan will go on. It is, for now, the great unanswered question of the Pacific century, and no one can honestly say how it ends. The island sits at the center of forces far larger than itself, holding a position it did not entirely choose, watched by a world that needs it more than it admits. But the island itself goes on living the way it always has. The flying fish boats still launch each spring. The butterflies still find their valley. The night markets still fill and empty with the tide of a free people going about their evening. Whatever the world decides Taiwan is, the island has already quietly decided for itself. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Across the island, the whole world argues over, and so few take the time to truly see. Until the next journey, take a breath, stay a while, and keep looking closer.